Donald Trump wants to punish the states that won't bow down and kiss his rear.
That would be because these states want to punish the businesses that don't bow down and kiss their rears.
There's something really wrong with it.
Donald Trump wants to get people back to work and keep the economy from collapsing in on itself. And you think there's something wrong with that? No, what's really wrong here is that state governments want to threaten people with violence if they try to earn a living for themselves. That's what's really to get pissed off about here.
Anyhow, this morning, Donald Trump tweeted, "Tell the Democrat governors," that would be Democratic. There is no such thing as a Democrat party. It's, this goes back to some really nasty politicians in the 1950s.
Oh hey, you know that party that used to advocate for fucked up shit like genocide and segregation? Well, we're not that party anymore. See, we changed our name and that makes us different from them now.
Saying, always call it the Democrat Party, and with the emphasis on the rat. The name of the party is Democratic.
I don't want to dwell on this particular point too much because I feel this is largely semantic and has absolutely nothing to do with the problem at hand, but Democratic candidates, as well as the party's website, use the two terms interchangeably, so it would appear that the distinction, according to the party itself, isn't that particularly important.
Anyhow, tell the Democratic governors that, quote, Mutiny on the Bounty, end quote, was one of my all-time favorite movies. Really? I mean, this was the HMS Bounty, and Captain Bligh was this insane, narcissistic, brutal, sadistic captain of this ship who tortured his own men, killed his own men, tied them to the mast.
So from Donald Trump referencing a piece of fiction as a joke, we somehow draw the inference that he approves or condones of the actions partaken in said piece of fiction.
So anyhow, back to Trump's tweet. Tell the Democrat governors that Mutiny on the Bounty was one of my all-time favorite movies. A good old-fashioned mutiny every now and then is an exciting, invigorating thing to watch, especially when the mutineers need so much from the captain. Too easy, exclamation mark.
And it's at this point that Thom Hartmann came to realize one of the major risks you run into anytime you expand the federal government. You run the risk of making the states more dependent, and it tips the power balance away from the states. So now the president can do shit like threaten to revoke something you're dependent for them on if you don't comply with his demands. We've seen this happen when the legal drinking age was implemented. Over time, states became more and more reliant on the Fed for funding their highway departments, and that suddenly gave the Fed enough power to say, if you don't make your drinking age 21, you're not going to get any funding for your highways.
Do you get how friggin' sick this is?
Donald Trump is simply taking measures to protect the economy and prevent state governments from overstepping their authority. That sounds to me like he's doing his job as a president.
How twisted.
So you're mad at Donald Trump for wanting to protect people's right to earn a living, but you're not mad at the state governments for interfering with people's right to earn a living. In my opinion, that's what's really twisted.
And sociopathic this is?
So Donald Trump thinks people should be free to live as they please and earn an income, and you think he's a sociopath for that? So Mr. Tom, I have a radio show and published books and living in a big fancy house but still bitch about billionaires. Hartmann advocates that state governments point a gun at you and dictate how you can earn a living, if you can earn a living at all, and most of these people are working class, not raking in a bunch of money from a radio show and published books, and wants to talk to us about who's a sociopath.
The President of the United States is saying that he is going to torture the governors of states.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Whoa, Tom, that's an extreme way of putting it. Yeah, I don't think what Donald Trump had in mind was hauling off these state governors to some dungeon in his basement, hooking up to the rack, or tying them down to a bed and whipping them until they decide to reopen. I don't know, maybe Donald Trump did somewhere say that was his plan, but I have a feeling you've been watching too much Pornhub, Tom. Not that I can say I blame him. I mean, we all need to find ways to entertain ourselves during this whole quarantine.
Who are trying to save their own people?
Well, that's just the thing. They're not saving their own people. If anything, they're putting people in danger. Not only are these shutdowns costing businesses jobs and generally making it more difficult for people to fend for themselves, but they're also increasing inactivity and stress, which are two things which tend to compromise your immune system and make it more likely that this virus will harm you.
Last week I was talking about an interstate compact, end the federal income tax.
For once Tom is actually proposing something I agree with.
It's merely a wealth transfer system from blue states to red states.
It's also a wealth transfer system from the poor to the rich. If you're poor or middle class, you pay the federal income tax, and if you're rich, not only do you get exempt from the federal income tax, but you often get grants and subsidies from said federal income tax that other people are paying.
The red states are, Mississippi gets $4 for every dollar they send to Washington, D.C. Why?
Because we have this really absurd system where you pay the government based on how much you earn rather than based on how much government services you use. So now the people who earn less money but use more government services can essentially piggyback off of the people who earn more but use less.
Just end the federal income tax. Mississippi can do whatever they damn well please. End the federal income tax, and the individual states can raise their tax rates to 30, 40, 50%, whatever they want, whatever the federal tax would have been otherwise.
While this would be a welcome step in the right direction, it still involves involuntarily coerced funding. I think we should do away with taxation altogether and just have governments implement voluntary funding, like toll roads. A well-placed toll road on a major highway can make huge amounts of money very quickly.
And then they can provide their citizens with things like Medicare for all and free college education.
Both of which would make the taxes in that state sky high and nobody would live there.
And a good hospital system that can deal with the coronavirus and testing, if the states had the money.
Yeah, but why rely on government for that stuff, though? I mean, back before Medicare, Medicaid was passed, we had a very robust private sector healthcare system in this country. And there are plenty of not only test kits, but also treatments for COVID-19 that are still sitting behind the FDA's legal red tape.
So anyhow, that was my pitch. Well, now you've got 3 states in the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington State, who are joining with a couple of states on the East Coast and saying, we're going to create a compact, basically, and we're going to decide when we're going to open ourselves back up.
All right, but suppose some private sector businesses within these states form a similar compact and decide, we're going to decide when to open ourselves back up. I have a feeling you'd have a problem with that, Tom. Why is it that states have a right to decide for themselves when to open back up, but not the businesses within those states? Since the businesses actually own the property they're in control of, wouldn't they have a stronger claim to this right?
Now, keep in mind, Trump never shut the country down, so he can't open it back up.
Okay, well, going by that same logic, the state governments never opened these businesses in the first place, so they can't shut them down.
The country is not shut down. You've got 8 states run by Republican governors. Where their people are really starting to get pissed off.
Pissed off about what? Like, how dare you not boss me around and dictate how I live?
And frightened.
Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine.
Here's the thing, Tom. If you're scared of this virus, you can lock yourself inside. You can shut down your business. You can quit your job. You can wear a mask everywhere. That's the thing. We're not saying the people who want to take these precautions can't. The problem is you want to force the rest of us to.
You got 8 states run by Republican governors where they're doing nothing.
Well, that's not true. Even in states that aren't shut down, the governments are doing things to address this virus, like acquiring more masks, setting up emergency hospitals, things that are 1,000,000 times more likely to help deal with this virus than grinding the whole economy to a halt.
But here is the President of the United States saying that he is going to punish the people of those states.
Now, actually, I'm pretty sure he only wants to punish the governors of those states. If anything, the people of those states are probably happy about this because it means they can go back to work and go back to living a normal life.
He's going to increase the number of dead people in those states.
If anything is going to increase the number of dead people, it's these stupid lockdowns. I mean, people are committing suicide and starving to death already. This response to the coronavirus is already having a body count, and I have a feeling by the time all this is said and done, it's going to have a higher body count than the actual coronavirus.
Because he's unhappy with the fact that they're not acknowledging that his power is absolute.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
Actually, it's more like these state governors aren't realizing that their power isn't absolute. And when a state government becomes tyrannical and starts oppressing its citizens, then the Fed kind of has an obligation to step in and do something about it.
That's what he said yesterday, absolute. And then Mike Pence came out and said, yes, it's plenary. Plenary is a fancy word that means absolute.
Right, but the authority that these state governments have is no more plenary than Donald Trump's. The problem that a lot of people are overlooking is that a lot of these state governors simply don't have the power that they claim that they have. So right here is the emergency powers clause under the Maryland Constitution. Now, if you recall in that video where I respond to Governor Hogan's whole shutdown speech, I basically asked where in the Maryland Constitution do you get this authority from, and you can see here, nowhere does it say he has the right to shut down private businesses. He can force an evacuation, set the evacuation routes, control traffic in and out of the state. He can even commandeer private property for emergency use. But nowhere does it say he can go up to a private business owner and tell them you have to shut down. Now this is just for Maryland, the state that I live in. Everyone watching this video, I encourage you to do the same thing. To Google, look up your state's constitution, look for the emergency powers clause, and verify whether or not your state's government has the right to do what it's doing.
By the way, March of 2020, the month that just ended, was the first month without a school shooting since 2002.
Can I see a source for that? I'm especially skeptical of this considering the left has a very flexible definition of school shooting. For example, in some states a firearm has to be discharged on campus in order for that to be considered a school shooting, while in other states the firearm simply has to be discharged within proximity of the school.
18 years, the first month without a school shooting. That's the good news. The bad news is that, during that month, Donald Trump killed probably 10, 15,000 people.
May I ask how? I mean, if you're going to fling that bold of an accusation against someone, you're definitely going to need to elaborate.
I don't know what the total death rate for the United States was in March. But, the numbers were probably in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, who cares about the facts and the details and the logic? I mean, it's not like we're literally accusing someone of mass murder.
So whatever the school shooters didn't do, Donald Trump more than made up for.
Aside from the fact that you have zero basis to back up this accusation, was this entirely necessary? Did you absolutely need to shoehorn in more leftist propaganda to distract from the issue at hand?
I think I mentioned earlier that Jill Karofsky, the liberal running for the Wisconsin Supreme Court, won the election yesterday. It happened, the returns came in after I got off the air. We were speculating about it on the air. And she beat Mr. Kelly, Daniel Kelly, Justice, who is sitting on the court right now. So now it's 4-3 conservatives to liberals.
So if you've been hurt and it hurts real bad, or if you have feelings that are making you sad, then it's okay. It's okay to cry.
And, I don't know if there's any, I'm not all that familiar with Wisconsin's elections. I'm not sure if there's any Supreme Court justices on the ballot in November.
What's wrong there, Tom? I thought you were all pro-democracy. Oh, that's right, he's a leftist. Democracy is only a good thing when the voters agree with him.
But this is telling us what happened in Wisconsin. I mean, these guys, Donald Trump and the Republicans in the legislature and the Republicans on the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin and the federal Supreme Court, all got together and said, we're going to force people to make a choice, your life or your vote.
And how exactly are they doing this? Yeah, Tom just keeps throwing around these vague accusations without going into detail.
On the assumption that Democrats are more afraid of the coronavirus than Republicans are.
Which is an assumption you yourself have made numerous times in this video, and an assumption that's not entirely accurate, seeing as my state has been put on lockdown even though being run by a Republican.
Because Republicans watch Fox News where they're constantly saying, more people die from the flu. In fact, that's what Britt Hume said yesterday.
You know who else said that? Your precious Dr. Fauci. It's the initial research that was published by Dr. Anthony Fauci that actually revealed you're more likely to die from the flu. It wasn't until leftist mouthpieces basically started bribing him with grant money that he started changing his tune.
Well, if we're only going to have 60,000 deaths, we had as many as 61,000 deaths from the flu.
Simply looking at the number of people who die from a disease tells us nothing about how deadly that disease is. We also have to know how many people also had the disease who haven't died. Roughly 60,000 people a year die from the flu, but considering millions of people get the flu every year and live, it wouldn't be a strong case for how deadly the flu is.
So therefore, don't worry, be happy. What are you worried about?
That's not really the argument we make though, Tom. I mean, even if this coronavirus was as deadly as people believe it is, it's still not carte blanche for the government to tell us how to live our lives. Like I mentioned previously, the people who want to shelter in place, who want to wear masks everywhere, are free to do that. But I myself, and a good chance there's a vast majority of others as well, am more than willing to risk getting sick if it means I still get to live a normal life. I think Ron Paul said it best. There's no 11th Amendment to the Bill of Rights that says none of this applies if we get sick.
Well, that's because we've been sheltering in place for a couple of months.
Actually, there's a lot of sources that suggest that these shutdowns have had little to no impact on the rate of spread of this virus.
I mean, that's because the blue states did it right.
Well, as I've mentioned before, Republican-run states are shutting down as well. Also, I love how when we point out problems with blue states, they like to claim it has nothing to do with partisan politics, but when there's something good about blue states, it has everything to do with partisan politics.
Now wait until these mind-bogglingly incompetent red state governors start dealing with it.
They already have. Like I said, it's mostly the Republican-run states that are doing things like procuring emergency supplies, setting up emergency hospitals and other types of medical services, but most importantly, they're encouraging economic growth. They're encouraging businesses to keep running, because they understand if you have a stronger economy, you'll have a bigger pool of resources to draw from when shit hits the fan. This is something you won't have, however, if you force your state to grind your economy to a halt. And this is going to hit these blue states way harder because, when you force businesses to close, when you force people to stop working, that diminishes the tax pool and your whole bailout gravy train grinds to a halt. At which point you'll probably be glad that there were some conservative and libertarian states that didn't go along with this stupidity. Do you want the economy to grind to a halt like a dumbass blue state governor? Or do you want to help enrich the economy, like a smart red state governor? If you answered the latter, then links to my Patreon and PayPal will be in the description. Until next time, this has been Floss Possum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.